At Superwoman, we have an amazing Superwoman in her own right who has joined our podcast today to share her story with our community. And when I read her bio, I had so many questions about her history, her choices, how she overcame different obstacles. So I'm excited to hear her story and her to share with us today.
I thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and share a little bit about my journey. So, as we were discussing, I was a police officer with the RCMP, which is our federal force, and I served all across Canada, different locations. I did everything from frontline, 911 calls, major crime. I worked in traffic services. I was a corporal in charge of youth initiatives for the province. I was the sergeant in charge of community policing. I took on domestic violence roles. I ended up running a detachment, all kinds of different things, all in one career. But I started policing, like we were saying, when there weren't a lot of women in policing. So I started 1995, and I ended up serving for 24 years with the force prior to retiring. And I have tons of stories. Some of them are really good and will make you laugh. Some of them will absolutely break your heart. And some of them aren't very kind. Yeah, they're things that I still unfortunately don't forget. But I retired in February of 2020. And I thought I was ready to take my next leap of faith in my new career. And I was all excited. And I left to become a professional speaker because I like doing that. I've done it a lot in my policing career. I did some media. I worked Crime Stoppers for a year and a half as well. So made TV commercials and everything for that. And I was all ready. And then I was off for about 2 weeks, retired, went on a big trip, came home. And then the next week it was COVID and the world shut down. So things took a big leap and a big turn there. And as I mentioned, it's really been the last year and a half or so that I've gotten out of my own way as opposed to saying I want to be. Now I can say I actually am. I put the work into it. I started building. I had my website redone, which I think is absolutely fabulous. And I can say that because it was another woman's concept. And we talked for a few months and she would do something and it launched in just January of this year, the new version, and it is fabulous. My colors, my branding, everything weren't what I was expecting. It just, the way we worked through it was phenomenal. And that's where I am now. Now I'm trying to get out there. I'm speaking a fair amount. I'm speaking at least once or twice a week, sometimes a little more. And I mainly talk around communication. So my tagline is brave conversations start here. And so those brave conversations, depending on the workplace or the situation I'm brought in to talk, then it changes a little bit. But I'm talking a lot about relationship building because that's what communication is building that relationship. If you haven't built a relationship, then your communication is very superficial. Hi, bye, bye. Like you don't go in and have a big heart to heart with somebody you've built no relationship with, which is a part of the problem with some businesses is, you don't even know somebody has children yet. You're going to go in and have this big conversation because they've been late for the last 2 weeks. Well, you have to know your people before you can have those conversations. So I talk a lot about those things. I talk a lot about mental health, having seen everything I've gone through, I was involved in a shooting. We had 3 officers shot, 3 were fatal. And I ended up becoming the operational NCO, so the sergeant that oversaw the team the men were killed on. And dealing with that, dealing with people that were coming in to replace those who weren't at work, running that team, dealing with people who were coming back slowly and trying to cope and be that person for everybody and keep things running. I saw a lot of people suffering in silence. I saw people, unfortunately, I lost 2 friends to suicide. One was 12 days after the shooting. He was a fellow officer. And then fast forward 3.5 months almost, I lost another coworker to suicide. So very important for me to talk about mental health and silence and why having psychologically safe workplaces and environments are so important because if it's not safe to speak up, like it isn't in policing, because then you get judged as weak and all kinds of other things, unless it's safe enough for somebody to ask for help, people aren't going to ask. So I talk a lot about that and what we can do communication wise, strategy wise to create safe environments for people. And when somebody does reach out, what does that look like? How do you actually support someone? So that's like one big part of it. And then I get into boundaries and self care and all of those things. And then I have a whole different, silo almost because I talk with women's groups or at women's conferences and I talk about my journey going into policing, over 30 years ago when it wasn't really very traditional and share some of what I went through being a female in the little boys club and all of that journey. And then some of my personal struggles, both with violence and mental health, having gone through everything I went through. And yeah, those are nutshell of what I like to talk about. And I'm writing a book. It's almost done and it's called The Unseen Scar. So it dives deep into everything I went through and shares a lot of detail.
I love that name. And I think it will resonate just kind of like how your stories resonate no matter what industry you're in. So many of us carry unseen scars, and it's good to be reminded of that because I think so often we can get hung up in our own business that we forget others, especially things we can't see. So I love that you're bringing a highlight to that. It's just kind of um, a good kind of balance back down. Like, okay, let's find our ground here. And I also like how you talked about communication and how that's the foundation of having an effective work relationship, no matter what your industry is. We were just talking about that the other day about bosses that come in on Monday morning and they're like, "Hey, how was your weekend? How was your weekend?" And you're like, like there kind of needs to be, a little bit slower roll or come in and say, "Hey, oh, let me tell you what my dog did this weekend," to kind of get the conversation going because your mind goes blank. It's like when I'd ask my daughter after school, "What did you learn at school today?" She's like, "No, no, I don't remember." So I love that you brought that up. And I did want to know if you felt comfortable kind of sharing with us a little bit more detail about the moment in your life when your heart said, "I want to go into policing," and your mind then had to give your heart permission to have that dream. What was that like?
So it wasn't really a dream. It wasn't even on my radar. At the time, I had danced. So I was still dancing. I was teaching classical ballet and jazz, and I had a degree in psychology. So I was working in counseling. And my boyfriend at the time and his friends were all writing the entrance exams. And they were talking about how hard they are. Nobody passes the first time, blah, blah, blah. And I spoke up and said, "Oh, I should write them." And I was looked at and told, "You're too little. You would never get in." And I have a little stubborn streak. And when you tell me I can't, I'll do it just to prove I can. So I wrote the test, not expecting anything out of it. I just wrote it with the boys. Well, I passed. My boyfriend of the time didn't. Only one out of the 6 boys passed. And then we just kept going through the stages. And I forget which stage he fell off, but the other guy fell off at one point. So I passed the physical fitness test. It's the same level. You have to be able to do exactly what the men do in the same amount of time, lift the same amount of weight. I didn't care that I weighed 115 pounds and some of these boys were 200 pounds. It didn't matter. You had to do the same things in the same amount of time. And then there was a psychological test, there's interviews, and I just kept passing everything. And then I got an offer to go to training, and I was like, "Oh, crap, I don't even know if I want to do this, so I can't pretend it was ever a dream." And I just thought, well, it's not going to look bad on a resume, so might as well go. And then while I was there, partway through it, I honestly thought, maybe I should just quit and go back and get a law degree because I loved law. But I hung in, and then we had the on-the-job training part. And so I did that, and that's when I was like, woohoo, I like this, because it was adrenaline. No 2 days are the same. Like, you have to be quick on your feet and quick with your mouth, like to control. It was just amazing. So I was like, oh, okay, now I know I like this. So I stayed and continued for 24 years. So it's not the ordinary. I know most people that I worked with, they grew up knee high to a grasshopper, always wanted to be a cop. Their daddy was a cop, their grandpa, their uncle, they're this, they're that.
So you essentially did it as, I don't want to say a dare, but as a told you so. Like
Right.
just Wow, I've never heard of anyone told you so, into a degree, or into a career field. I absolutely love that, and that speaks so much to just your spirit and who you are, and how I can see how that would carry itself through. You can't turn that fire off. If that's in you, that's in you. And so it's going to show in all of the different aspects of your life. So, how did you handle, speaking of your boyfriend not passing, how did that go down? And then how did your family and your close friends, were they worried about your safety, or did they think it was kind of an odd choice? Like, how'd that go?
Well, my boyfriend became my ex-boyfriend before I left for training. It was always his dream and his goal, and unfortunately, he never did become. So it's kind of hard to, yeah. So that was okay. I was in my 20s, like the people we were in our 20s aren't the people we are later in life. So that's okay. And then, yeah, my mom and dad, they were a little shocked, but not overly. I know a lot of people were like, some of the church ladies said to my mother, like, oh, but she's so little. Aren't you worried? And my mother was like, I just try not to think about it. That was my mother's answer was, I just don't think about it. But yeah, it was, there were moments where I definitely would have had people, concerned with what I was doing and the calls and the,
I can only imagine those experiences, and those experiences you can't unsee. You can't tell yourself that that didn't happen. You can't soften it. And you kind of talked about mental health. How have you protected your mental health through those experiences?
so good and bad. Always been very active. Like I said, I grew up dancing. I continued dancing. I taught fitness. I still teach fitness. I teach yoga. And so I've always had that outlet of healthy, where I've always been mindful of what I put in my body. I'm mindful that my training. So I never fell into some of the bad habits of fast food and donuts and all, the stereotypes. They didn't apply to me. But it can also, in my case, it became a negative. So following the shootings in Moncton, my way of coping was I ran every day, but I ran to the point where I would literally throw up or almost throw up before I would turn around and I would run back. So I was doing that every day before my shift or after my shift, sometimes twice in a day. And I was going to the gym. I didn't sleep a lot because unfortunately I was having a lot of nightmares. And basically, if I fell asleep, I have nightmares and then I'd wake up and I'd stay awake. So I was lucky for a 4-month period if I would get 3 to 4 hours of sleep a day. Right from the shootings onward, I worked 44 or 45 days straight before I had a day off just because of the urgency of the situation and backfilling positions and everything. And I'm one of those weird people that when I am stressed, food is the last thing I ever think about. So I was running too much, I was going to the gym, I'm not sleeping, and I was forgetting to eat. Well, not healthy. But from the outside world looking in, I was just the super fit. I was in my 40s, so I'm just super fit. I had a 6-pack. I was a crazy girl that ran every day. But I was also the person who was taking care of everybody else on my team, making sure they were okay, making sure that they knew they could come in my office, they could close the door and they could talk to me. And I had grown men that were a foot taller and 100 pounds more than me. I'd say, do you need a hug? And they would take a hug and then they would cry like babies because there was so much grief and so much. And we come from a culture where silence is resilience, which is um, anything but strength. And so I was so busy taking care of everybody else, I forgot to take care of me. And so I was at this location, which was my hometown. So I was there for 4 months doing this role. And then I came back home, back to my other job at headquarters. And within the first week of being home, that's when my second friend died by suicide. And that's when I finally hit a wall because I think I was finally home and I let myself cry. And then 3 days later, it's like, okay, I went and talked to my doctor. And the first thing he said to me was, you need to get on a scale. I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, I got a 6-pack. I'm rocking it for, a woman in her 40s. And he's like, no, get on a scale. Well, I had lost almost 20 pounds in 4 months. My blood pressure was 70/43. Yeah. So all of my healthy coping strategies ended up not being so healthy at that point, and I ended up being off work for 5 months in total.
Was that a voluntary, or did you
Part of
ask?
and part of it wasn't. See, my doctor wanted me put off, and I actually asked to speak to somebody, which, after everything, I was like, okay, I really need to talk with someone. So I had the referral made, but the RCMP, unless it's broken and bleeding, they don't see anything wrong with you. So I was only off work, I think maybe 2 weeks when I got called in to see the health service officer for the province. And basically, he told me he didn't see anything wrong with me and I could come back to work. So instead, I had a little meltdown and I just, unfortunately, the first suicide I had to attend and I had to notify my friend's family and the coroner and do all of those horrible things that a human should have to. And so I just kind of asked him if he had ever had to do any of those things. And he just looked at me and I said, "You haven't, I have. Don't fucking judge me." And I walked out of his office. And yeah, it ended up being much longer than I thought. Once I started to take care of myself, it just took a long time. And I think the first 2 weeks I slept. Like that was pretty much, I was medicated and I slept. And yes, I think the first couple of weeks after everything, when I finally crashed, my biggest accomplishment some days, honestly, would be take a shower and change my pajamas. So, I was the girl like, here, I can do everything. I don't break. I'm strong and da 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 da. And then finally, my body gave out and said, you can't fake this no more. And so, yeah, so I talk about it because I've had my own struggles. I still struggle a little bit around certain times of the year, certain dates. And everyone does. And it's finding good outlets. Like everybody notices, if you start drinking a whole bunch, you notice that. People notice when you come in and you
Mhm.
smell like a brewery.
Mhm.
Or you've literally been eating your emotions, people notice that. But when you're doing something like I was, which was staying fit, nobody really noticed much. And I mean, I wear a big uniform. It's not like a form fitting little dress that you see every curve. No, I dress in man clothes. So you had the bulletproof vest on it. So it was that noticeable maybe to others. And there was so much grief and so much tension and chaos that a lot of people were purely like myself. We were just on survival mode to keep going after everything that happened.
And I do think there is a very unfair bias in our culture. If you eat your feelings, you're judged for being weak and selfish and not being in control of your chaos. But if you handle it the way you did, you're applauded because you've come out of it. Look how great she looks. And so I think there's definitely a lot. So I'm glad that you have the vulnerability to talk about that and to kind of share that because it kind of as I was listening to you speak, it reminded me of a girl I spoke with who was a recovering anorexic, and she would not eat as a way to she couldn't control anything in her life, but she could control if she ate or not. And I'd never gotten into the under layers of that disease until she shared that, and I kind of felt that when you were talking, that running was something you could control, working out was something you could control, and so you wanted to do a lot of it. And like with her, she wanted to do a lot of not eating, just so I can totally see that. And I like that we talk about these things because it is so taboo that I think we do kind of keep it in, or we think, oh, I'm the only broken one. I'm the only one who doesn't have my act together to handle something like this. So once you got back to work, how were you received by your colleagues and your superiors? Like, was there a shift in the respect or in how your job roles? Did they say, oh, just use the stapler, no heavy lifting for you?
So, well, we carry a gun, right? So when you go off for mental health reasons, you come back slowly. It's all done. Like there's certain criteria. Like you come back part-time in the office, like you go through different stages before you are back out in full uniform. But again, that depends because I was at headquarters, so I had a role where I wasn't a first responder out on the road driving a car. I was actually running a program out of headquarters. So I went back into that role. So that's different. But I know other places, and I've had friends who, because they are frontline and they're so short staffed that they don't much of a chance. And then there's such a preconceived notion and depends who your boss is. Like I've seen some things when people have asked for help handled kindly. And I've seen instances where how it was handled did more harm than good. How's that?
It's a
Yes.
great way to put it, yes.
When somebody's struggling and you show up at their home and you send an officer that nobody likes because he's not a kind human being, and you send that officer, two officers to somebody's home, take away their firearm and their uniform in front of their family,
And their dignity.
there's better ways of doing it. I have seen that done to other people. And so I think that's a big barrier for people asking for help. Like, oh shit, like, are they going to make an example out of me? Like, and then how much help do we really get? Like, when I finally asked to speak to a psychologist or psychiatrist, I was put on a waiting list. There wasn't anybody immediately. And they wonder why so many first responders own lives. Well, when you're broken and you have finally reached rock bottom and you say, okay, I need help. "Oh, well, we'll put you on a 3-month waiting list. And if we can get you in sooner, we'll let you know. But you can come back to work tomorrow before you've talked to anybody."
That is tough. What would you say? So you talked about how you had just these diverse experiences, and what would you say was the most beautiful day you had? The day that you were like, I am so glad that I was put in this place on this earth in this moment to do this action with this. What was that day like?
In policing?
Yeah, because I feel like I'm envisioning, like, like, running through a building and grabbing a baby, and it wouldn't have lived if you hadn't have been there, like, like, is there a moment where you're like, "I really changed the world today?"
Unfortunately, a lot of what I did, you don't hear back from. Like, you help people in the moment, not, you don't know what happens later on in life. I do know that because of some of the work I did in domestic violence in particular, people survived. They actually got out alive, which unfortunately not all women do. I guess the biggest thing like that came back to me was somebody I had helped. She was trying to get or had left a really abusive relationship. She had a newborn child with him and he was stalking her and making death threats and everything else, and had assaulted her multiple times. And I was asked by somebody at the gym if I would talk with her because she wasn't comfortable going to the police. She was afraid. So, anyways, had a conversation. I helped her, guided her. She ended up pressing charges. He went to jail. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm going for my massage at a clinic that I always go to. My girl had left sick, and they said, "There's another girl if you want. You can get a massage with her." I'm like, "Sure." And so, anyways, this is the person that I had helped. This person not only got out of the relationship and everything, she went back to school. She got her registered massage therapy course. She has a good job. She's working. She's doing well for her and her daughter. So we caught up during my massage. And before I left, she said, "Oh, I got to tell you something." And I was like, "Okay, like what?" And she said, "I just want you to know if it wasn't for you and her parents, because her parents supported her a lot. But she said, if it wasn't for you, I know I wouldn't be alive today."
Wow, I
Yeah.
love that. All from you just kind of doing a told you so, with the test. It's like that was your mission in life. That was you were supposed to be in that place at that time to do
Yeah.
that. I love those stories. So if people wanna hear more stories from you, or if they wanna find your book or have you come and speak at one of their events, where can they find you?
My website is my name. So it's TammyWardSpeaks.com. I'm on LinkedIn. So Tammy Ward. Everything is branded the same. Instagram, my Facebook, it's all just my name, making life real easy. There's lots of information. There's some videos there as well. There's a free downloadable as well for people if they'd like, which has a 7-day reset, which is just helping people reset their mindset. And it gives you prompts like, what is one conversation you've been avoiding? Here's a way of starting a brave conversation. Just different little things to help people.
Because I love just how you're able to take your experience in policing, and it parallels, like I said, just even work, corporate America, and just so many different ways. And I love the messaging that you bring and just the bravery that you had to do something. I don't want to say outside the box because we shouldn't gender role classify things, but we are there still, if just being honest. So I am just so proud of your bravery that you could, because there is a little girl at home who's like, I want to be a police officer. And everyone around her is like, no, you're going to be a school teacher. And so she has role models like you that have walked the path, that have shared their story. So I just absolutely love that. And we'll be sure in the show notes, we'll drop all those links. So if y'all are driving in your car while you're listening to this, we'll try to, while we have our police on the line, we'll try to make it safe so you're not writing things down. But I so enjoyed speaking with you today. When I read your bio, I just could not wait. I was like, this lady sounds super cool. So I just couldn't wait to connect with you and hear your story and just appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share and talk with people. It's wonderful.